So we were commissioned by the Parks Trust as part of a National Heritage Lottery funded project to reveal, restore and revive Great Linford Manor Park. And our role really was to investigate some of the original 18th century features of the landscape park that used to surround the manor, to make sure that the information that the Parks Trust used to then potentially restore some of those original features was as accurate as possible to make it authentic, really. This is the ha-ha wall that we discovered as part of the project. This was one of the landscape features that was put in the mid-18th century when the formal landscape garden was put into place around the manor. Essentially what this does is the ditch that I'm standing in at the moment would have run all the way from the canal on one side up towards what is now the access road for the manor house. And really it's a form of separation within the park, separating either different parts of a landscape garden and forming a bit of a boundary. But at the same time, it keeps all the lines of visibility open. So if you just put a wall in place, obviously you're looking straight at the wall and not anything else. But with this one, you can actually still see, you can see down to the canal, you can see across the rest of the landscape. And yeah, really that's what this is. So this originally, this wall probably would have been slightly higher than it is now, possibly kind of the same height as the top of where those roots are. And it would have run all the way along. Most of it is now infilled, but we've managed to recover the original profile. So what I'm standing on now is the original bottom of the ditch. And it's got a bit of a gradual slope to it on one side, partly to facilitate if a deer or something wanders in there, they can get back out, but at the same time, you've got that separation to the formal garden on this side to make sure that nothing comes in there that's not supposed to be in there. Parts of this ditch are still quite well preserved, so there is still a noticeable dip in this part of the park. And also historic records show that there was a ha-ha built into the original designs. So this was kind of the obvious place for it to be if there was one. So all we did was clean back all the soil and debris and rocks and roots from that have kind of built up over time because it's been in disrepair for so long. And then that was one of the main questions. Is there some kind of retaining wall? Is it just a ditch? Or is there a palisade? Or essentially what form does the ha-ha take? And yeah, what we found is this lovely dry wall that seems to be relatively well preserved considering how long nobody's really been looking after it. What you can see here is we've got local limestone rocks, and it's just a basic dry wall foundation. So the first thing they would have done is dug out the basic ditch. All they would have done is gotten these stones and just stacked them on top of each other. There's no mortar or anything. We found no evidence of anything actually being stuck together. So it would have been relatively natural looking in appearance. There would have been roots going in, little plants growing in the crevices. So that again gives it that slightly more natural appearance, almost as if you've just exposed the natural rock, which kind of helps it blend into the rest of the landscape a bit more rather than having a fence or a wall line. So apart from the actual, digging out the feature and cleaning it up, a very vital part of what we do is a full record of what we've uncovered. And that's partly just because of a lot of the time by digging something, we kind of destroy the evidence that's in the ground. So what ends up happening is we have to keep a very detailed written and drawn record as well as photos of anything we uncover. So this is our representation of what this ha-ha wall looked like when we uncovered it. So we actually draw a scaled section of this entire bit of wall that we've uncovered, and we draw in almost every individual stone with exact measurements and try to record any details like little gaps, and we try to recreate the rough shape of the top of the wall as well to create as full a record as possible. and as much detail as possible for anyone who wants to have a look at it. And then on top of that, we've taken lots of photos and have actually stitched those together to make a 3D impression that you can pick up and move around on the computer to give you the shape of the ditch as well. And then we also do a written record where we describe what we've seen, so the colour of the soil that's built up in the bottom of the ditch, the rough shape and size of the stones, and where we also make a note of any finds that we've got out of it, just in case anybody wants to look at it again and come back to it, or the Parks Trust want to use any of our information that we've found for their reconstructions and the projects that they're doing going forward. Normally on any fieldwork site that we do, the main thing that we find is pottery of various descriptions. So I think some of the things that are most exciting are pieces like this, so slightly older pieces of pottery that we can use to figure out how old the features are that we're digging. Generally, as a vague rule of thumb, the more low quality something looks, so the more chunky looking, maybe slightly blobby in the form, not very clean forms, lots of little inclusions in the actual fabric of the pot, those tend to be the oldest things that we find. So these examples that I've got here are probably some of the bits that are from the earliest phases of the park. So we've got this quite early pottery, and then as we move more into the medieval period and slightly later, that's when we get these nice industrially produced, well-made pots that look something like this. So this green glaze is a really common medieval colour. It shows us there was some kind of slightly higher status activity going on, and that's also reflected in, I'm going to say now this wasn't found here, that's just an example of something similar, but we did find evidence of glazed floor tiles that would have been similar to this one here. And again, it's just evidence of the original manor being here and high status activity going on in the park. And all of that, when the original manor was demolished, all of that was just kind of scattered. Some materials were reused, others, like chunks of brickwork and dressed stones that were part of the original manor, just kind of ended up in the park, scattered, maybe to fill in random holes or level out an area when the landscape garden was put in place. And that's how they've survived in the ground until now. Something else that we find very commonly on sites of this sort of period, so 18th, 19th century, are these little white stems. So these are part of clay pipes. Originally they would have had sort of a length of about up to 1/2 metre with a little bowl at the end, and this was the main way to smoke tobacco up until really roll-up cigarettes, and then the industrially produced cigarettes we've got today, that are popular today, came in. And what happens with these, because they're very cheap and they were mass produced but weren't produced to any particularly high standard in most cases, what happens as you're smoking, the end of it gets really soggy and soft. So before reusing it, people would have knocked off the end of it just to make sure that they've got a nice new bit for the next time. And that's why we find these little fragments of the stems scattered all over the place. So on this project, in this ha-ha ditch, we actually found quite a few of these fragments, and that just indicates that, you know, people were using the landscape park for leisure activities, going for a walk, having a smoke, and as they went along, much like people today, they just discard their rubbish as they go along wherever they feel like chucking it, and this ditch is kind of the ideal place, I guess, to throw something small into. The area I'm I'm sitting in now is the Doric seat, which is another part of the mid-18th century formal landscape garden when it was put in place. So this structure behind me, that's all that's left of the Doric seat now. We've got some, again, foundations built out of the local stone, which is the same stone as the ha-ha wall, which is this stuff. And then we've also got some brick and then a layer of just general rubble, possibly even, again, some building materials that might have come from different parts of the park. And again, the local stones, just little chunks. Before we get to what used to be probably the floor surface that you can see at the back of the original Doric seat. So the Doric seat originally was like a little summer house that was on the edge of this slightly more wilderness type area. Originally, obviously the canal wouldn't have been there in the original park, but it still works out in such a way that sitting in the Doric seat would have given you a really nice view across the canal and into the other part of the park originally. So there would have been a clear line of sight, possibly with some of the trees that are in there now not being there, to give you a clear line of sight across into the rest of the park. And really it was just another feature that crops up in landscape gardens all over the place. It's just another point of interest that kind of provided a bit of shelter or just a point to walk to if you're walking around in the gardens. So what I'm standing next to is one of a pair of cattle troughs that are located at either side of what's left of the Doric seat platform now. So we've got photographs from about the 1960s thereabouts that actually show what's left of the Doric seat in use as a cattle shelter. So at that point it still had the original walls, columns and a bit of a roof on it, and yeah, it was used for livestock essentially as a little shed or shelter for them. So what these things actually provide is just a bit of an extra insight into how much the park and the use of the park has changed over time, from a private area originally that only the people in the manor had access to an area of grazing for livestock, to ultimately the public park that we can all enjoy as it is today. So my favourite part about the Doric seat is that opportunity that we might have to link this area, this structure, right back to its original 18th century origins. So it's, it's a secluded, slightly sheltered area where you've got a fantastic view now across the canal, but originally it would have been over the rest of the parkland. But, it's just a little area for people to come, have a picnic, sit down and have a chat. And essentially, people can do that now in very much the same way as they could in the 18th century. So I think this is a really nice way to link it right back into the original landscape of the park and the original purpose of the park, which was leisure and enjoyment. The community got involved in all of the first stage of the excavations out here. We had 2 sessions each day that people could just sign up for online previously, and they could turn up on the day with no previous experience or anything. And we had volunteers in all of our trenches working next to the Cotswold Archaeology team and just showing people how archaeology works, how we do things, and teaching them some of the skills that we have and that we need to excavate and interpret a site. And the volunteers all did a fantastic job of, cleaning walls, digging features, recording, doing everything that we're doing. And they were all really engaged and interested, so it was fantastic. So initially, during the first phase of works, when the volunteers were here, all we did was we cleaned what's still visible above ground and then slowly came down, exposed parts of these two walls that we can see, and then basically dug a metre and a bit wide trench just to see if there was any formal path and just to understand the Doric seat as a structure a bit better. And because we'd exposed these walls that we didn't expect to find during the first phase, we then decided to come back in July for a second phase, just Cotswold Archaeology people. And we came back for another week of field work and had 4 people in here working during that time just to expose this wall line a bit better. So we dug out a bit more of a square area around the 2 wall lines, followed one out towards this fence, and just tried to figure out a bit more about how it relates to the Doric seat. Is it definitely earlier, and maybe what else is going on? So the way we recorded this was quite similar in a lot of ways to how we recorded the ha-ha. We took a lot of photos from all different angles just to make sure that everything is somewhere covered. We did a lot of written descriptions of, exactly how the potential older wall lines fit together with the Doric seat. And again, like with the ha-ha, we did a section drawing of what's behind me. Again, this, similar to the ha-ha, it just shows a bit more detail about the way the Doric seat was constructed and how it fits together with everything else. So what you can see here is we've got those blocked out shaded areas. That's these 2 walls. So all that means is we kind of measured around the walls, so we've got their exact extents and show exactly where they fit against the later Doric seat structure. And then what you can see very well from the drawing as well is the different construction layers of the Doric seat itself. So at the bottom, these big lumps of stone. Again, like with the ha-ha, we measured each stone and drew it in individually exactly where it is positioned. And then on top of that, we've got the line of bricks that you can see at the top there, sort of sealing that lower, slightly rougher construction level that was going to be buried anyway. And on either side, it's just starting to show some of the upper layers of the actual construction and the entrance of the Doric seat. The area that we're standing on now is the location of one of the trenches that we excavated as part of the first phase community project. We're standing about halfway between the current manor over there and the location of the original manor, which it was up that slope between where the 2 pavilions are now. And what we found in this trench was, again, a couple of walls and a occupation layer, which just means it's not really a pit or anything, it's just a layer of very fines-rich, charcoal-rich material that accumulates as part of the normal everyday use around a dwelling. So what we think we found in here is some evidence for what this area looked like and how it was used before the manor privatised, for lack of a better word, all of this into the formal park. So originally the high street of Great Linford would have extended down here, so there is a chance that what we might have is some of the original buildings along that old high street. It's sort of, some of the pottery that we've got from this came out of sort of 12th to 14th century, so well before the original landscape garden and park, which means that it just gives us another brief, quick insight into what was here before the people of the manor decided that actually they wanted everybody out and they wanted this as their own private park. So in this location, right outside the front door of the manor, We put a small excavation area in to see if we could find the remains or any evidence for an old sundial that used to be here that we've got in old photographs of the front of the manor. So particularly the Friends of Great Linford were very keen to see if we could find that location. And actually roughly where I'm standing right now would have been, we found a small pit that would have been roughly the right size to fit the base of the sundial, and we assume that this is the location where it was put in the ground. We didn't find any evidence of the actual sundial or even the foundations, but like I say, the pits are roughly the right size and roughly the right shape, so it makes sense that this is somehow related to that. We've also found another couple of wall lines. Archaeologists do love walls. And those again are potentially either to do with activity that was here before the manor was put in this location, moved from up there, or the other option is that there was some kind of, before this turning circle was put in and landscaped, there's potential that there might have been a low wall just at the front of the manor there, just to separate out the space a bit more and maybe create a slightly grander entranceway than it is at the moment. We're not entirely sure, we only partially exposed those, so it's another bit of a mystery, but it definitely hints that there's been lots of stuff going on, lots of remodelling, re-landscaping and rebuilding. So this one was special because normally we don't really get the chance in our day-to-day work to really involve a lot of other people in our work. Normally it's a case of the developer wants us on site and away again as quickly as possible so they can start whatever it is they're trying to develop. But this time we actually got a huge amount of interest from the local community, so many people signing up and joining in the field work, and just dog walkers and general members of the public walking through the park. We've had so many lovely conversations with people who were really interested in what we were doing, and we just got to share so much of what our work involves and get people interested, so that was fantastic. My favourite thing about being an archaeologist is that I get to travel around, go to different parts of the country and just get to see all these different sites where you turn up and you never quite know exactly what you're going to get, or if you're going to get anything in fact, until you actually start digging, and then just trying to piece together a story about the site that does it justice. And even though I think every archaeologist kind of says, oh, you know, it's not just about the finds, it's about everything, but, you know, finding stuff, especially if it's, you know, 2,000-3,000 years old and nobody's touched it pretty much in that whole time, it's pretty exciting.